the triple frame of how to think about pricing your offer. So there's going to be 3 sections of this, right? The first section is, what did you ideally want to charge? And the way to think about this is, what will the desired lifestyle that you want to have that will be supported through your coaching business, what would that be, right? What is your ideal lifestyle equal in terms of what income you need to cover that based on the expenses that it'll take? So like that may not be the today pricing that you offer, but knowing your ideal pricing, what is the pricing that you need to make it work for your lifestyle that you want? That's what I would call ideal lifestyle pricing, right? And when you do that, there's an exercise we do in part 1 of our 90-day client creation challenge, which is establish your vision. And part of that is, what is the lifestyle you want? Therefore, how much do you need to make? Therefore, what should you be charging based on how many clients you probably have space for? What does that look like? That is like the ideal pricing. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Faisal, before we move on to part 2 of it.
Yes, and this is important. Well, and a lot of coaches might be thinking, well, what I can price it anywhere we want. We'll get to that, but remember that almost every price in the business world is arbitrary. It gets stabilized by market competition. But in the beginning, every price point for any product is completely arbitrary. Like the phones that you buy, the cost for these phones is not more than $10, but you're paying over $2,000 or something like that at this point. Why? And how are they able to charge this much? And there's a lot in there. We won't go into branding and all that stuff, but it's arbitrary. They've made up the price. It has nothing to do with how much they have made to how much they've spent to make the product. In fact, the bigger the margin, the more they can make, the more sustainable the company is. And of course, the product needs to be good quality. The service needs to be really good quality. Otherwise, they can't sustain it for long enough. They can't build a business. They can't get enough people to use it, because pretty soon people get caught up with what kind of, especially nowadays, if you go to any business, like if you're get into an area looking for restaurants, go look at the remarks underneath, the ratings underneath. A lot of people make decisions based on that. What is that? People actually going there and eating.
The
People
reviews.
actually testing the food and the reviews. Your product will have reviews. The quality of your product will have reviews. So ultimately, you don't need to be that worried about what your pricing. It is completely arbitrary. We're going to give you just these 2 frames. The first one is what Daniel gave as the ideal, and then we're going to talk about where is the starting point for you. Maybe you can talk about that too, Daniel.
Yeah, so I do want to, so Faisal, you jumped the gun in my mind. The 3-part framework, there's also a second framework that I was going to cover, but you just covered it, which is arbitrariness. That pricing can be arbitrary. Even though I disagree with you on the cost of the phone being less than $10, if you think about the cost of the components, it's actually more than that. And there's also cost of labor that goes into making it. So it depends how you define the cost of that device. But the point
Right.
you're making isn't about whether
But
the
it's a
number is
lot
accurate.
lower than what they sell it.
The point you're making isn't whether that $10 is accurate. The point you're making is that you have to sell it for more than it costs, which is actually part 2 of our framework, right? So we'll come back to arbitrariness and what form of arbitrariness should you engage in the second half of the frameworks. But the 3-part framework that's first is, what is your ideal lifestyle pricing? And part 2 is, what is the floor? So for example, if all in the phone costs, let's say $100 to make, can they charge $80 to sell it? Probably not if it's the only thing they sell, right?
Yeah.
It's the only thing they're selling. You can't charge less than you're making. So you have to know what we call the floor. What is the absolute minimum that makes it worth it, right? If you're charging less than it costs you, so let's say you have $1,000 a month in expenses and you have only space for 1 client, and you charge that client $500 a month, that is a losing proposition. If it costs you $1,000 to serve a $500 a month client, right?
Yeah.
So that does not work because you're not profitable, which means at some point, if this money matters to you, and that's not always the case, but you're going to run out of money and you're going to have to do something else to make money, which means you can't continue serving people, which is why it's so important to think about what is the margin, what is the profit, and what is the cost of your time and all the things all the expenses you have to run your coaching business. Like, are you paying for a Zoom account? What are you paying for? And how do you know how much it's going to cost you? So what is the floor? What is the absolute minimum you need to charge to make it worth it? And you can think about that in a couple of ways. One is, what are your expenses? How much time are you spending? What is worth it for you? Like at this point in your career, if you were to sit on the call for, let's say, an hour a week for 12, let's say for half a year, for 6 months, now let's say 3 months, for 12 sessions 3 months, an hour a week. Would you accept $5 for that? I don't have the answer. Only you have the answer. Would you accept $500 for that? Would you accept $2,000? Where's the line for you? At what point do you say, like, yeah, I would accept that, but I wouldn't accept lower than that? Know what that number is. Because if you know your offer, my offer is weekly for 3 months or weekly for 6 months, and I can space for 3 clients. Therefore, what's worth it for me? What's that floor? What is the floor below which I cannot go? Not what is the ideal. That's the first one. What's your ideal pricing and what's your floor pricing? Those are the two things for you to think about as you think about what you might want to charge. We still have a third place to go, but does that make sense, Faisal, the way I explained it?
Yes, it does. And there are a bunch of stuff in between. And I want to clarify a couple of things. So you mentioned that you're going to run out of money. Actually, I think the biggest danger that coaches have is energy and time. You're going to run out of energy and time more than money first. Because what most coaches who get started, they will get started as a side to do this. Because they will either have some kind of full-time job or some kind of stream of income that sustains them, and they're starting this as a side. This is the case with almost any kind of online type of business that people do. But let's say coaches, for example. So, and here's what happens. Actually, I was talking to one of our clients yesterday, and we talked about the burnout rate for coaches. Like, what is like, and coaches don't take that into account. So, and here's why. The reason why they don't take that into account because they watch other coaches and they kind of subconsciously emulate that. You see coaches that are out there, they've been calling themselves coaches for years. But when you actually dig into what they're doing, they're not coaching anybody. It's just a title. They've been going through multiple certifications. They're learning a lot about coaching, but it's all theoretical. And they don't have a business. They don't have any clients. Maybe they had a client here and there, but there is no sustainability in it. They're still running something else. But here's what ends up happening. And I've seen this with fairly experienced coaches in terms of how long they've called themselves a coach, not in terms of the experience of actually coaching people or running a business, but how long they've called themselves a coach. They will keep calling themselves a coach for 4 or 5 years or so. And something will happen at that point, and it could be a life emergency or something new came into their life. They're not making money out of it. They've been calling themselves a coach. And the only reason they're calling themselves a coach is because they don't have any expenses to be a coach. It's literally just it's a title. And if it was
They've got
any
the
other
foot
business
in the water of being a coach, but they're not really able to swim because they're not really committed to getting wet.
They're not, but think about it. If this was any other kind of business, imagine you started a store, like a tangible store, no customer. I have a store, but there are no customers coming in. How long do you think it will take you to be like, I can't do this because the overhead is so high? I need to get out of this because you're losing money.
The blessing and the curse of coaching. It can have a very low overhead, but so low that you're not committed.
You're not committed at all. So, and that's the beauty of coaching because 90% could be take home for you. And that's that's a really good business model, especially in the current economy, because a lot of when you like one of my family friends, he's leaving his restaurant business. You know why? He's actually making profit. He's making a lot of money, not profit. He's making a lot of sales. But when he looks at his expenses, the overhead, the inflation is so high, and his skill sets are not there to manage it well, he gets overwhelmed. He doesn't know what to do. He's like, I got to get out of this.
Yeah, the nice thing about a coaching business is it can be run with very low overhead if you're committed. Know what makes it worth it for you to charge, because if you don't ask for enough to make it worth it, you're going to feel resentful. You're going to lose energy on that. And you can say like, hey, for the first client, I'm willing to charge less than this because to me, that's worth it. This is strategic for me. It's experiential for me. I'm going to charge less than I know I probably should charge here because that is worth it. And then you have to know what's worth it for you. So keep an eye on what is worth it for you today.